not able to attend. Pero
I
sa
would
YouTube naman.
Yeah, good, good. Silisan.
So who's starting it? Are they waiting for me, or is
Yes.
Dean Rizal going to start?
First
Okay.
is,
Thank you,
We're
Dean.
about to start.
Okay.
there's the convener. Good afternoon, Madam President.
Good afternoon, everyone.
G.
Benj, okay na, pa-delete mo.
Dapat may mute ko, Lisan.
Yeah. In hopes of inculcating a futures thinking mindset, we are pleased to share with you an initiative driven by an idea of transforming past and present undertakings into narratives of the future. My dear friends and colleagues, to our esteemed global experts, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and happy birthday, Dr. Jose Rizal. So the 21st century era has introduced unprecedented events that have confronted many global jurisdictions. And of course, Philippines is not an exemption. There are so much uncertainties, and I think we need to face all these opportunities and probabilities by using evidence-based, high-caliber, effective policies in order for us to be relevant. Thus, the creation of the Philippine Futures Thinking Society, or PhilFutures, which is a professional organization. PhilFutures is here to provide or to serve as a platform for us to advance our skills. Advance our skills by the use of theories and practice as basis of our future development through the use of futures thinking lens. That is why we always say that we cannot predict our future, but we can create it. And we can forecast it by using alternative scenarios, by using probabilities, and also by looking at the questions on what ifs and also the unknowns. This afternoon, as we launch PhilFutures, we are honored as we are joined by our global experts on futures thinking. We have with us Dr. Anita Sykes-Kelleher, founder and director, Designer Futures Australia. We have Dr. Maya Van Limpet, senior researcher, Futures Research from Belgium. Dr. Cheryl Chung of Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, Singapore. Dr. Luke Tay, principal futurist, Singapore Food Agency. We also have Dr. Jim Dater, director, Hawaii Research Center for Future Studies. We have Dr. June J. G, Director of the Graduate School of Institute of Future Studies, Tamkang University, Taiwan. Of course, we have our keynote speaker, Dr. Sohail Inayatullah, Unesco Chair in Future Studies. Dr. Peter Bishop, Teach the Future, Houston, Texas. We have Dr. Jennifer Gidley, former President, World Future Studies Federation. And we have Mr. Rashdi of Malaysian Foresight Industry. We have Senator Pio Cayetano. We have Dr. Lily Domingo and Dr. Alex Brillantes. So PhilFutures started as a dream to answer the big H, or the how. How are we going to shape our future in the next 10 years or so, especially in education, in public health, in governance, and in other areas of development. This is quite ambitious, but if we apply the intergenerational responsibility doctrine, then we should do this. That is why we need to set targets. Not merely setting targets, but we need to actualize these targets. And with this, we need to equip ourselves with both hard and soft skills. And it's high time for us to really focus our attention or our energies to upskilling and reskilling ourselves. So that's why Futures Thinking, or the PhilFutures as a professional organization, is here. And with that, please allow me to acknowledge our founding institutional partners who have been helping us for the last few weeks to launch this Philippine Futures Thinking Society. We have the Philippine Society for Public Administration, the Graduate School of Public and Development Management, Development Academy of the Philippines. We have the Center for Leadership, Citizenship, and Civil Society and Democracy of the University of the Philippines, National College of Public Administration, College of Continuing Advanced and Professional Studies, University of Makati, Senate Committee on SDGs, Innovations and Futures Thinking, and the Center for Engaged Foresight. As we begin our futures thinking journey, let me introduce to you the world's highly respected scholar and practitioner on futures thinking. He is a political scientist, a professor at Tampang University. In 2015, he was awarded the first Unesco chair in future studies. In 2010, he was awarded the Laurel Award for all-time best futurist by Shaping Tomorrow Foresight Network. My dear friends and colleagues, please welcome our keynote speaker, UNESCO Chair for Future Studies, Dr. Sohail Inayatullah. Good afternoon, Dr. Sohail.
Hello, great to see you again, Dr. Lizan. Happy to be here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you very well, Dr. Sohail. Only that, Celine, can you stop share? Or we are viewing Manilyn Lacaste's screen. Can you please stop share for a while?
Should I start and then share?
Yes, yes, Dr. Sohail, we're just adjusting the screen share. Someone's sharing her screen. I think this is the University of Makati. All right, there you go. Thank you for that, and sorry for the technical glitches. And that's very possible. Anyway, Dr. Sohail, are you there? Are you ready
I'm here.
to share
Ready to go?
All right. Yes, Dr. Sohail.
Brilliant seeing everyone. It's nice to be with families and friends. Many of you I've known, well, some of you I've known for at least 40 years now. So thrilled to be here. So I'll go for about 20 minutes and I'm hoping I will do the screen share, and let's hope that in fact it works. Let me try to go there. There we go. So I'm hoping you can see my first slide. So this is really a version of what I did at the APFN a while ago. Can futurists become superheroes? Engaging Thanos and COVID-19. So if you want to go, let me try to move this away a bit. So the whole Thanos approach in COVID-19 is that there's a zombie apocalypse out there. Things are very bad and they're going to get worse. And the issue is, who should we hate the most? So this is kind of the world that we've entered. The Thanos approach, very clear. Things are going to get bad. He wants to eliminate 50% of the universe's population because there's too many of us. And COVID-19 in a way adds on that. It creates not just a zombie apocalypse, but something called the Great Despair, 5 to 6, 7 years of a recession, nations fracture apart. Some people are very clear what's going to happen. I don't see how they can have so much clarity. What I can see is 3, 4 scenarios, if not more. Now, the Thanos approach is he wants to take over the universe. He wants to use his superpowers to take over. So he collects these stones, and COVID is a bit similar to that. Stone number 1 is climate change extinction. So in effect, he collects these stones and he does those, he collects them, and this is climate change creates new pandemics, new problems, and basically in 50 to 100 years, we start to disappear. Stone number 2, he succeeds by what's called the inequity stone. The inequity stone is essentially what we're seeing everywhere now. Dramatic rises in inequity between nations and between peoples. So markets are up, but we know we're in one of the most unequal periods in human history. So that's stone number 2. Stone number 3 is Mr. Trump learned from Thanos. This is the domination stone. So if you heard Mr. Trump recently, he said, if you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. That was his response to the protesters. So we're seeing this domination in Queensland, where I live, rise in domestic violence, rise in spouse abuse, rise in sexual violence. So this is dominate over others. So he's collecting the climate, the extinction stone, and the domination stone. This is basically to go over humans. Humans over nature. Nature is an externality. Everything is a commodity to be used. And the fifth stone is this identity stone. And we're seeing COVID is actually amplifying this. My country, my nation first, my religion. It's the whole worldview of my. So this is stone number 5. Now the crucial part in Thanos' arguments, if you've not seen the Avengers, it's worth seeing, is that the future is inevitable. There's only one future. And thus that's basically how fascism works. They have the answer. They use religion, they use identity, they use inequity, they use domination, they use all these factors to basically say there's one future. They know that, and stop doing critical thinking, stop looking at alternatives, follow the future. So that's basically the program we've been giving, and we're really in the middle of that. Now, our role as futurists is to say, well, maybe not. Maybe there's alternative futures. Maybe there's not a zombie apocalypse. Maybe there's not a great despair. So work we've been doing on COVID-19 futures is a different scenario called the needed pause. Everything slows down now. Meditate, rest, enjoy nature. 2020 in that sense is canceled. I love the air we're breathing. I'm so happy I'm not flying everywhere. So there's the pause that slows down so you can speed up next year. You make the changes. The many schools I'm working with, the many institutions I'm working with, they're trying to figure out how can they keep some of the good things here. And then this goes even further. There's not one future. There could be a radically different future. This is the global health awakening, the social revolution based on evidence-based science, breakthrough after breakthrough. This basically people, planet, prosperity, purpose. So we're seeing COVID-19 is amplifying some of the worst things in humanity and also creating the possibility to amplify some of the best things. Both are possible. Thanos' view that there's only one future is we as futurists essentially always critique. When I was gym data student for many years in Hawaii, that was one of the key takeaways, not one future, but many futures. So this is kind of the choice we're facing now. So what are the antidotes to the Thanos and I would say the COVID-19 kind of fascist worldview that's emerged? So this is the antidotes. What are our possibilities? How do we enhance our social immune system, our public immune system? How do we vaccinate ourselves? There's 7 I've developed here. So let me go through these, and there's a paper on this I can send you. The first, of course, is meditation and mindfulness. This is slowing down. This is the pause. This is the deep rest. This is really slowing down when there's crisis everywhere. What should we do? We should meditate. We have a discussion with Interpol in 2 hours. And again, that's something I'm going to push there. If you're going from anger and fear, you'll make incorrect decisions. You'll make hurtful decisions. It's slowing down so you can make wiser decisions. If you're going from ego, family, and religion, nation, again, is not the future for all. So we're trying to see what's the future for all. That's new humanism. So meditation and basically my identity is based on the planet, not on narrower identities. New humanism is not an ideal. It's not philosophical. It's a daily practice to challenge our own racism, our own religiosism, our own nationalism. And it's done daily. I confront myself daily with this. It's an inner process. I have one colleague in Manila, when she went through this process of doing the mindfulness, she said, her metaphor for life is the real street. It's geopolitical, it's pragmatic, it's closed. She transformed her life metaphor to Luna Street, bamboo, air, lighting, and she's actually redesigned her home. So this is the mindfulness is looking at ourselves and using that as a way to change. The superpower number 2 to challenge Thanos is see the future as a learning journey, as an asset. It's not just zero loop where we give information, no one changes. It's not just rushing to do things. It's double loop. It's actually learning to learn and learning to unlearn. It's the deeper reflection where we challenge the process product. And eventually we want to move to what's called narrative foresight. You write your reality. So this is actually what we're trying to do. And why do we do this? Well, we know failed strategy comes from misleading assumptions. So we challenge our assumptions and then change the future by doing that. 82% of failed strategies come from wrong assumptions. So by having scenarios and visions and narrative, different assumptions come out different futures. And we know this works. Our colleague Renee Rohrbeck's work, if you do this well in the corporate sector, profitability goes up. Market capitalization grows up as it should. But more importantly is new work about to be published by Professor Chen. He says, actually, if you do pre-test, post-test of people who take a futures course, everyone claims stuff, but Cole has amazing empirical research. They become better transdisciplinary thinkers. They're more open to alternatives. They're more optimistic. The metaphor goes from the Thanos metaphor, it's inedible, to we're a boat in a large ocean. We have radical agency. We can make choices even though we understand that there's weights of history. The third superpower is we challenge the US future. The US future is an institutional practice that's with us, that continues even though we wish to change. The many schools I'm working with all over right now in Australia, the US future is students are passive. Professors, principals make the decisions so they don't learn, they get the script. The script is the factory, how to be the obedient worker. Obedient workers are not so important in this century. Creative, novel, critical, transformative workers are what we need, even when we might go towards post-work. So we challenge the US future and say, what's not working? For the last 20 years, I've been working with Peter Black, with OIE, Department of Agriculture, Department of Health, and we've been saying wet markets don't work. Designing cities going to wildlife areas don't work. Those are things that create pandemics, that create zoonosis. Those are things we have to stop today. Now, of course, we have to find a livelihood for those people who work in that area. It's not just shutting them down, but making the transition. So a project we're doing with the government of Egypt, with the UN is, well, what would software as food as software look like? Localized, resilient supply chains where you can't be disrupted. We know, if you know Luke Tay, he's going to be here today. These are things that are occurring. The recent forecast, 90% reduction in US beef and dairy industries by 2035. We've already seen the largest milk company in the US go bankrupt because of the move to alternative milk. We're seeing disruptions in terms of solar energy. I have energy company after energy company saying, what should we do? Where do we go? What are the scenarios? How do we move from basically fossil fuel to a peer-to-peer global energy networks? First local, then national, but eventually global. So this is P2P sharing. The first is in Bangladesh, where basically they create a platform to allow energy exchange. So this is a quote by Sohail Hasni from Sheikh Yamini. It's not due to a lack of stone that the Stone Age ended. It won't be due to a lack of meat that the meat age ended. So this is part of the third thing is for the superpower of futures. We anticipate and have anticipatory systems to see how the world is changing. The fourth superpower, as I mentioned earlier, the fifth one, I'm sorry, is the ability to map and create alternative futures. Not one future, but many futures. So every day someone wants us to forecast markets in COVID-19. What will airlines look like? What will happen? And we say we don't know. Zombie apocalypse is in a way what we're seeing in the US right now. New Zealand, Australia is a needed pause. In the developing world, there's the issue of lockdown or poverty. One person said on the street, well, should I die from COVID-19 or should I die because I won't have food tomorrow? This is the great despair. We could see the US fracture. China could be a confederation in 10 years. And the fourth scenario is this global health awakening, the portal, what Arundhati Roy says. See this as a possibility of shift. So this really goes into what we're talking about is the superpower of narrative, the ability to tell a different story. One legal company I was working with, they said, our old metaphor is David, not Goliath. We're always fighting, we're always fighting. We hire people who are great fighters. That's great, but we're not making systems change. So our colleague Rio Miller talks about it's anticipatory system change how we'll see the future. So the new metaphor is we're not here always to fight. We're going to develop the polio vaccine. It's a systemic which reduces the incidence of polio. So you change your core narrative and that changes your national global strategy. I didn't do this project, but if you know Microsoft, they gained 80 billion in value. Why? They interviewed the CEO. He said, my old metaphor was know-it-all. We hired know-it-alls. And then we shifted to let's hire all learners. Let's shift it to hire the curious. So you hire different people, you change the company culture, and his value went up. So different people create different stories. My own colleague, Rob Burke, who we teach at Melbourne Business School, he says actually organizations, you may say have structures, but organizations are actually conversations. You change the conversation by changing the purpose, by changing the stories, and scenarios are fantastic in doing that if done well. Now, when I was working with NEDA in actually Manila, we ran this Educational Futures Project. As we looked at the factory of Filipino education, what they came up with, they said, look, we actually have to become a wrecking ball. We cannot do the normal no change, the factory continues forever. We can't do marginal change, let's just have some online courses. Even adaptive change is not enough, where we try to go basically become novel, look at adaptive possibilities online anywhere. We have to become a wrecking ball and actually dramatically hit the old system. This is not a time for marginal change. This is a time for revolutionary change in education. And over, educators tell me that they can't do it the way they were doing before. We have to shift. And the last superpower is crucial here. You may have a new story, but you keep on doing what you used to do before. I remember the vice chancellor of the university I used to be at 10 years ago. He said, let's all cooperate. Let's all cooperate. I said, great. But then we looked at his measurements. You increase your value to the university if you don't cooperate. So the story or the culture was cooperation. The core measurements were no competition. So everyone knew it was just talk. So the key in our work is not just challenged. We want to challenge the youth's future. We want to be mindful. We want to meditate. We want to look at how the world is changing. We want to do scenarios. We want to find the narrative. But crucially, we want to link the new story with new measurements. Otherwise, we keep on doing what we did before. So what I'm suggesting here is if Thanos has his 5 stones he's collecting of climate change extinction, of identity as narrow, as inequity, as domination, as vanquishing nature, we have our own superpowers which we can use as a community. To me, they become crucial as you're developing and forming and creating and innovating in the futures thinking society in the Philippines. Now, Avengers gives us the typical, they're Hollywood, but then you start to see even a critique, a deconstruction of the typical superheroes. So we have Kamala Khan, we have Ultraman, we have a whole range, we have Shang-Chi. So we're starting to think the narrative superpower archetypes can change across culture. So in a way, as futurists, we're trying to write these new stories to empower young people. They hopefully will live to 100. So we're trying to give them stories they can use so they can keep on changing, they can keep on transforming. So if you remember the core argument to all this, Thanos is defeated by time. He's not defeated in the narrative he creates. He creates the narrative of power. We're suggesting, yes, we understand geopolitics. We understand the role of nation states. We understand the power of capital. But we also understand the power of epistemic knowledge. We understand the power of knowledge communities to start to speak different futures, and then those go from speaking to knowing to action learning to prototyping and go back, and they end up creating the alternative future. So futures thinking, of course, we know starts with critique and ends with hopefully innovation. Thank you so much. I'll stop sharing there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sohail. That was very informative and very inspirational as well, because the focus really is how are we going to create our narratives today by using the situation that we have now. And you mentioned about the future, that the future is inevitable and the future is here with the present values, drivers, trends, and other events that we are facing right now. So we need to prepare for that future. And how are we going to prepare that? We are doing an initial step. In fact, a baby step for the Philippines to do that and to prepare for the future. Thank you so much, Dr. Sohail. I hope you'll stay with us because we still have our fireside chat with you and with our global experts who are with us right now. And to proceed, I would like to acknowledge and to welcome Senator Pia Cayetano, if she's with us right now. Sir Noel, is Senator Pia with us now? Okay. I was
I'll stay as
informed.
long as I can, Lizanne, but I may have to go after all, but I'll stay as long as I can. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Sohail. Anyway, since Dr. Pia is not yet around, we would like to entertain 3 questions for you, Dr. Sohail.
Sure, I have time.
Yeah. Maybe you can type in your question in our chat box if you have question for Dr. Sohail. But I would like to acknowledge maybe Dr. Alex to pose the first question. Dr. Alex, who is a classmate of Dr.
1980s. I think 1980s.
Yeah, in the 1980s. Dr. Alex, are you there?
Mute.
Yeah, Dr. Alex, sorry, we can't hear you.
He's muted.
Dr. Alex, can you fix your audio, please? Okay.
We'll have to go to someone else, Lizanne.
All right. Okay. Our Vice President, Sherman. Okay. Is that you, Sir Alex?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
Actually, shall I proceed with my discussion? Or, well, this, I'd like to really...
Question first for Dr. Sohail, and then later on we can proceed with your presentation.
Later on.
Yes,
but
sir.
I really like your metaphor, Sohail, about the importance to deconstruct. And you started with something very soft about the need to meditate, something that is really very, very difficult for those who are very quantitative, for those into hard sciences. I think that's very, very true. In fact, Harari mentions that too in his own book about the importance of meditation, etc., etc. So I guess my question is, since you've been doing this for the past 40 years, no, how do you think we, Lisan mentioned the baby steps, no, the futuristic, this movement, what are the initial steps that we should do? Because I'm not unaware of the fact that even in the Philippines, maybe you've worked with them, Sohail, based at the Asian Institute of Management, there's a futuristic society also with Mr. Gil Santos. I was with them at one point. So this movement is being started by Dr. Lisan together with others. Is there a particular strategy perhaps that we could work together, given the pandemic?
So I had a meeting, 2 detectives flew over last year to see me. They were developing their national foresight strategy. And they gave me 100 pages of documents on crime, organized crime, etc. They said, could you read our documents and help us develop our national strategy? And I said, what's your goal? They said, we're there to set up the Center for Futures for law enforcement. I said, well, before you start, tell me your own narrative. And they were a bit confused. And I said, what's your story? And then she figured out, she goes, aha, there's a tsunami of crime coming. The village is law enforcement and they don't know how to deal with it. Not only crime, public opinion is coming. So I said, what's your metaphor here? She said, I'm the machete wielder. I will cut down the trees to take everyone to a safe, protected place. Then her colleague, who was head of strategy for the country, I said, what's your metaphor? She goes, I'm the white witch in the forest. I whisper potence. I call the right commissioner. I call the right person. So now they had a dual strategy, the machete wielder and the white witch. So this set up their actual strategy. Their goal was to move law enforcement, which was unaware of the tsunami, to a safe space. So what I would recommend for your futures thinking society, not just how Philippines should change, not just what they should do, what's our own narrative of who we are and how do we wish to play? Who are we today? Who can we be tomorrow? And then you set that up. Because my research and what I've seen over decades is the story sets up how people communicate and sets up what's possible. So I would start there. Have 4 or 5 of you set up your today story and then go for where you want to be. Use that to decide what you do next. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sir Alex, and thank you, Dr. Sohail. Just one more question. I hate to let you go, Dr. Sohail, but we have a question from our colleague, Dr. Gary Ador Janisha of the College of St. Benilde. Would you like to to ask that question, Dr. Gary? Or you want me to read your question?
Hey, Rizal. Hi.
Thank you.
Hello, hello. Hi. Well,
Yes.
as mentioned in the chat box, again, from early thinkers like Alvin Toffler and John Naisbitt, no, who basically also produce what they thought what will the future looks like. My question is, in this era where we experience a lot of disinformation and to some extent some historical reversionism, how will the future will look like if you have players like the likes of Cambridge Analytica or other institutions who try to provide some misinformation? So that's I would like to ask in this forum. Thank you very much.
I wish I had a simple answer for that, Gary. It's something that's distressing me. It's something I'm trying to figure out myself. Clearly, the last 30 years, those of us in critical futures wanted more pluralism, wanted more voices. We did not anticipate that 20% of our friends on Facebook would believe Bill Gates is a cannibal and 5G created COVID-19 and half the world's leaders are lizards. So this tells me that we should have, when I work with health systems, I work with medical systems all over the world. And one of my best conversations, I took hundreds of doctors through this process. Our conclusion was we need a multi-door health system, a door for homeopaths, door for meditation, door for pollution experts, a door for massage, a door for allopathic Western science. All the doors need to be there. The issue was, what's the controlling door? Our conclusion, the controlling door must be allopathic science, meaning evidence-based science. So we need many voices, but this is getting clear. Here's the evidence about a health process. Here's the actual evidence. So this is the pendulum shift from there's only one future to endless futures to now creating some grounding over we will make decisions based on the evidence we have. So that's what I like to see in the medical system, and I like to see in other systems. Now we know part of the issue is lack of critical literacy. Countries that believe in those conspiracies, 25% of them believe the sun goes around the earth. That's the research I just saw in the US. 33% of American Republicans believe Aladdin's homeland, Agrabah, should be bombed. And as you know, it doesn't exist. It's Disney. So it's very expensive to bomb a place that doesn't exist. So this is saying, one is we need grounding in evidence-based, even though we have many futures. Two, we need to enhance our critical literacy. I understand people with no voices have felt oppressed, and now they're needing a voice. They feel powerless. I get that. How can we find a way to express power in ways that are still evidence-based? That becomes all of our challenge. I think that's our role, all of us. We want futures. We don't want futures that hurt others. So when I look at what's called con spirituality, spirituality is a con game. We're seeing that everywhere with the New Age, right? What is their actual implications of that? So implications are always one ethnic group is evil. One group is bad. The implications of their worldview lead to disaster. So option one would be go the evidence-based, we have to do it. Option two, I always catch them. Okay, if you're saying this is true, what does that lead to? And then they spin their own web, and we know ultimately it's a racist, nationalistic, sexist dialogue that emerges. So I always say, have a criteria which we can evaluate what you're saying. Does it lead to this or does it lead to that? In my opening thing, does it lead to Thanos and Zombieland? Or does it lead to a global health awakening? We're all on one shared planet creating a new future. That's a simple question I ask every conspiracy group. And after 2 minutes, they shut me down and forget me.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And
Yes.
look forward to hearing the metaphor of the Philippines Futures Thinking Society.
Yes, of course, Dr. Sohail, we're very excited to have you in the Philippines, and we have a lot to learn from you. And I love that phrase of you saying that a future that will not hurt others. That's why earlier I mentioned that we have to apply this intergenerational responsibility concept, taking care of each other and taking care of the future generation. Thank you for that again, Dr. Sohail.
Okay.
Now we'll have another inspiring keynote speaker, which I don't think I need to have a lengthy introduction for her, but she champions futures thinking in the country through the Senate Committee on SDGs, Innovation, and Futures Thinking. And we've been working for the past few weeks on futures thinking together with our global experts and, of course, our foresight experts in the Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senator Pia Cayetano. Senator Pia, good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone.
Good afternoon.
Nice to see you all. And Dr. Sohail is still there. I thought I would miss him. So I actually was in another conference on securities, on disinformation and terrorism, and I couldn't quite leave. So my mind is a little bit half here and half there. But I wanted to catch Dr. Sohail, so I kind of slowly detached myself from the other one to join all of you. So hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here and to join you for this momentous occasion. I'm really excited because in the past months, I've learned a lot from the future thinkers who have joined our hearings and some of our discussions that I've been able to share already with decision makers in the Philippines. And what I wanted to share is that I truly believe that the timing is perfect. I think I was trying to look for the right adjective, but the timing is perfect because these kind of topics are very difficult to introduce to government decision makers. I don't think I have to elaborate on that. Most decision makers are kind of in the now in terms of having to put out fires left and right, having to deal with constituents who have very pressing needs. And so I understand that the tendency is not to have the time or the energy to really study the future. And until recently, I also didn't know that there were professionals who studied the future. I only knew of fortune tellers. And in fact, in one of in my hearing last week, I'm not sure if it was Dr. Anita who mentioned it, but who can tell the future? And I said, oh, in the Philippines, there's a lot of them who claim they can tell you what the future is, a lot. But that's why I was so happy to learn that, oh, there are actually professionals who can help us study what the future scenarios will be like. And that is what I've started to emphasize during the discussions I've had. I actually had the opportunity just yesterday to give my very first talk on what futures thinking is all about to the very progressive team of my brother, Mayor Lino Cayetano of Taguig. And not only was I excited for them, but I was excited for myself because I know that as a learning process, one way you can determine your level of understanding of a subject matter is if you can talk about it confidently. So my brother's group were my willing guinea pigs. And I was quite happy with how the talk went. And this is really a product of my listening to all the experts out there who have graciously joined me in my hearings and educated me as well as those who have attended. So yeah, with that in mind, I just truly my mode right now is gratefulness for having been introduced to this topic and seeing so many Filipinos already, Filipino professionals at that, adept and very much interested in moving our country into a future that is a planned future, a future that we just don't step into and like, whoa, where are we? We're like Alice in Wonderland. I think that's the goal, no? That we shouldn't be. I think the goal, in a way, it's nice to be Alice in Wonderland, full of curiosity. But on the other hand, there are many ways where we can limit the unexpected by planning. And this is where I'm just very quickly going to segue to a very interesting topic, which happened by chance when I was giving this talk to the team of my brother, the Taguig City team. Now, basically, there were about maybe 20 or 30 people. These are the people who run the city with my brother. So we happened to look at the Futures Wheel, Futures Platform Group, one of my favorite tools. And I said to them, okay, click on this, you know, you choose what area of interest you have. Let's click on it and take it from there. And one of the clicks they made was, I think the title was something like Alienated Young Men. And I kind of had an idea what it was about, but I said I haven't actually clicked on that. So we read it together. And it's about the situation where there's more and more young men who are, a lot of them are actually college graduates. A lot of them are, you know, smart and ambitious, but they find themselves in a place where they feel helpless and they feel like there is no future. They can't find a good job. They can't see the future getting even brighter, and so they get very they get depressed. They get very frustrated, and then they become an easy target for other groups who may have very specific but disruptive intentions, like overthrowing governments or whatever that is. And they could be easy prey to these kind of groups. And so I said, wow, that was an interesting choice that they made, because this is something that I'm looking into separately. I've been looking into separately with this other area of interest I have. I studied and I continue to attend a lot of, especially these days of COVID, where these webinars are so easily available. Before you had to physically transport yourself and go there. But I'm a graduate of the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. So that's also an area of interest I have, securities. And so in this time of COVID, obviously the focus was health security, but then we've also been studying what happens when there's a crisis over another crisis. And so that issue of alienated young men, and for that matter, it could be alienated young women too, just basically young people who feel like, you know, the rug was pulled under them and all their dreams of a simple, bright future, go to college, get a great job, buy a car, buy a condo, is suddenly not easily available. So we then ended up having this interesting discussion, which included our reality of how politics is unfolding, and how through the use of internet and social media, that it's very easy for people, especially during this time of COVID, to pick up information, to share it, to become passionate about it, because, you know, we are human beings. We are meant to be passionate about something. But to use this irresponsibly could really pose a great danger to us as a nation and as a region, and as human beings. So anyway, my point is, I was very excited that unintentionally we were able to stumble upon that example, which resonated with the city officials, and more it becomes more important to everyone. So my immediate goal, with the help of everyone here, is to do whatever I can to empower this organization, to spread information about the importance of futures thinking. Personally, I would like to see young people involved in our talks in our hearing wherein Dr. Bishop attended. You know, it was the futures of education, and you know, how we can start young with young children. I feel very strongly about it. You know, we touched upon how children have the ability of understanding history, and how they can put themselves in the past and try to understand how the people in the past, what their environment was that molded their way of thinking, and ended up in their making the decisions they made, such that when they look at themselves in the present, they recognize that in the future, you also would want the future people to also look at you and understand the context of where we were. You know, what do we know? Who knows if 30 or 50 years from now, people would say like, lockdown, what was that thing? You know, what was that? Or what if they said something else, you know, about something we chose to do, something that our science tells us is the right thing to do. We don't know. But if we help generationally help spread the importance of understanding information, of using the information to plan for the future, I think we can really go a long, long way. So I would be, please consider me an active member, supporter of this organization, and let me know what we can do, what we should do to really promote this all across the country. And again, like I said, I think the timing couldn't be any better because people are open to hearing new ideas. That's I think what I was driving at. Open to hearing new ideas, even at high level government. I'm blown away that my advocacy for bike lanes are finally being heard, and I was blown away that about 10 members of the Senate wanted to be a co-author of that bill, when before, you know, thinking of bike lane and more environmentally friendly measures was kind of like a pie in the sky. You know, it's really like you draw the line between advocacy and what can really happen in terms of planning, and now it is really happening. So yeah, I'm excited about these opportunities, and if there's weekly activities, I'm game. I will find time because I don't need to travel to get anywhere. I can make myself available, and because I do have the ability to reach out to many different sectors of our society, I can contribute that as well. So let me leave it at that, because I'm more interested in hearing all of you than speaking on this topic, which I consider myself a devout learner at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Pia Cayetano, and thank you for the support. It's an affirmation, really, that we can democratize futures thinking in the Philippines. As much as we would like to ask questions from you, we would like to consider the time difference that we are having now with our international speakers. So please allow us to proceed with our fireside chat with our global experts, and Mr. Sharman Cruz, our futures thinking practitioner in the Philippines, will help me moderate this session. Sir Sharman, we will give 5 minutes for each of our global expert to say something about futures thinking. Would you like to begin with our fireside chat? Sir Sharman, thank you,
Dean Lizan. So in the keynotes, of course, I would just like to put some emphasis on the thought that Sohail Inayatullah gave us, that, you know, us as a learner in futures thinking, and later on, you know, as a person who would engage in action in the near future, in the immediate future, is that we must be aware of the biases that we tell ourselves, right? Of course, we are all co-creators of this future, and then we must be aware of that. And second, of course, it's futures thinking or foresight's not just about imagining learning alternative future. And it's always very important that we have to situate ourselves, develop our capacity skills to actually actualize and realize that future. So let's jump into our fireside chat. So we will have a lot about we will have a lot of conversation about unboxing the future this afternoon. We're going to have a conversation about foundational futures thinking stuff. I know you would like to hear that. Concepts, a futures program available in Asia and in the Philippines, a futures literacy that's being offered in different parts of the world, both online, virtual, and of course, academic. And but before we do that, allow me to briefly introduce our guests and esteemed members of the Field Futures Global Advisory Board who are with us today. So Dr. Anita Kelleher is the director of the Center for, Director of Designer Futures and co-founder of the Center for Australian Foresight. We also have Dr. Cheryl Chung. She's the director of the Executive Education at Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. And then, of course, our very own Dr. Alex Brillantes, President, Asian Association for Public Administration, Dr. Maya Van Linput, editor of the World Futures Review and senior researcher, Applied Futures Research, Erasmus University College of Rizal. And then we also have Mr. Rashdi Abdul Rahim, the Vice President for the Malaysian Industry Government Group for High Technology. And last but not the least, Mr. Luke Tay. He is the Principal Futurist at the Singapore Food Agency. Welcome to the Philippines, and thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to have a conversation about futures and foresight today. So I would like to start by asking, some questions to Dr. Anita Kelleher. Anita, I did a quick search on Google, and it revealed just how curious, humans are about what's next. The search generated 103 million hits with the word futures thinking, and 103 million hits for the phrase the future of. I bet, however, that there aren't many people, organizations, and departments who know or have coined the word or have applied futures thinking and foresight in planning, research, policy, strategy development, among others. Now, for our audience here who are with us today and who are eager to know and learn more about futures thinking, can you help us understand more about, one, what is futures thinking actually, and how and where should we start if we want to understand more about the future? Dr. Anita, please. Hello?
Okay, you've unmuted me now. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay. So I would like to start by saying, whether you use the term futures thinking, futures literacy, foresight, futures studies, essentially we're talking about a field of work that looks at the future. I've seen so many different definitions of futures thinking that I'm of the view now that you make up your own definition, seriously. For me, futures thinking is literally shifting the mindset from thinking about the future, and I'm going to use Sohail's Thanos example. Thanos said there's only one future, to thinking about multiple futures. And this also then goes to a question I saw we didn't have time to answer, but I quickly will, from Oliver John Tan. How can you apply scenario analysis in guiding businesses to survive the uncertain economic climate? If you're a business that says, I believe in Thanos, there's only one future, then if that future's wrong, your business is not going to survive. In order for your business to thrive, you need to be looking at multiple futures, using those scenarios, and then creating strategies that are flexible to go across the scenarios as the world changes and evolves. That's fairly quick and easy explanation, but I can always go into that in more detail if we had the time. And there was a second part to your question, Sherman. What was the second part?
Yeah, the second question is, how and where should we start if we want to understand more about the future?
Okay. Well, I've got to say education, obviously, there's got to be learning. But also I'm cognizant of the fact that in many countries, not everyone has equal access to learning. So I would say that you start at the school level, start at children's level at home almost. What do you want to be when you grow up? Get children thinking about the future in a positive light, but also allow children to create their own organizations of the future. And I've done this and it works really well. When it comes to adults learning about this, there's obviously master's degrees. There are certificate courses you can take online and in face-to-face. And I believe some are being explored now at DAP. So there might be something next year. Talk to Lizanne about what she's got in the planning for courses that you can take locally. My own experience with teaching and learning is that people learn more by experience than by reading or going to lectures. So at the moment, we're in a situation where some of us are still working from home, we're still in lockdown, and our only alternative to learn now is to go online and do an online short course. And I've done a couple myself during lockdown. I think to learn deeply about this, don't just rely on the virtual courses online. I know we can't all get back to face-to-face, but ultimately for me, the optimal spread is part online, part face-to-face, and a lot of experiential learning, a lot of applying what you learn straight away in your organization and sharing all the knowledge and skills. So participatory futures for me is a really big thing.
Yeah, thank you for that, Anita. That was great. Dean, could you please ask the next question, please?
Yes, and which one was that? Where do you start? Or is there another one?
Yes, thank you for that, Anita. I would like to ask this question for Dr. Cheryl of Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Earlier, Senator Pia mentioned about that it's really hard to introduce this futures thinking, policy foresight to our decision makers. So the question is, how can futures thinking inform public policy and strategy development? Yes, Dr. Cheryl, your microphone is still off. Can you unmute it, please? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me, and of course for this being able to participate not only in this wonderful webinar, but also in this journey that you're starting with the Philippines Futures Thinking Society. Is very exciting. So let me just get to the question. So my own background, and I'll declare my biases. My own background is as a practitioner. So I'm now in an academic institution, but I previously spent quite a lot of time in the Singapore government in a foresight role. So perhaps you can allow me to make 3 points about how I think futures thinking and public policy kind of interact, right? For me, I think futures thinking can be a real core part to good governance, right, and good policy making. You know, one thought I've had during COVID is, you know, will short-termism become as frowned upon as racism in the future? You know, is that something that we can work towards, right? That we actually deliberately try to think about the long term and think about how sustainable and how resilient our decisions are. But there are 3 experiences that I think are quite common to at least definitely my life when I was a civil servant, and I'm sure many of you in this audience will kind of identify with. The first one is firefighting. So I think many people in the public service and in many organizations, it's definitely not a public service problem, identify with this experience of, like, you know, trying to just kind of react to, you know, the problems that keep on happening, and you know, wishing that you had the bandwidth, you know, to anticipate some of these problems, right? And I think that's where futures thinking as a practice can actually play quite an important role, because it really allows us to build an anticipatory capacity within the government, right? So not just as, you know, once-off activities, but also as organizational habits, you know, that these are things that we consider and that we can think, you know, as organizations, as in a disciplined and structured way about the future, what these alternatives might be, and then therefore be a little bit more prepared for that. So I think that's one experience that I have. The second experience I have, which I'm sure a lot of you will identify with, is government has to deal with wicked problems, right? So no matter where you work in government, you usually have a name card, you're usually tied to a certain organization. You know, so let's say you're in education or you're in health. My last job was in transport. But you have this experience of actually maybe not all the policy levers to solve the problem that you're looking at is within your ministry, right? So for me, my last big futures project in government was looking at autonomous vehicles. But it's not just a transportation problem, right? It's also a security problem. It's also an economic problem, you know? It's also an urban design problem, that kind of thing. And I think futures also enables us to deal with these wicked problems and contestation of ideas around how these problems should be solved in actually quite a, again, structured and inclusive way. I really like what Sohail mentioned about the Avengers, right? You know, and futures teams across government can also operate a little bit like the Avengers, and each individual Avenger has their own perspective of what that future might be. And I think that contestation and having a safe space to be able to do that within public service is quite useful. And then the last point I would make is, you know, in a public policy school, we always say that, you know, the thing you have to think about every time you make a policy decision is who are the winners and losers, right? Unlike businesses, government cannot choose its citizens, right? We can't say that, oh, you know, I can only target a certain customer base or only go into a certain market. So government in particular has to be very conscious, about the effects of its decisions on marginal groups, vulnerable groups, that kind of thing, and what these alternative futures might look like from their perspectives as well, right? It's not just the Thanos version, again, to tap on Sohail's metaphor. So those are just three quick, ideas that I had about how I think futures thinking can be particularly useful in a public service context. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Cheryl. We'll get back to you later. We'll proceed to the next question for Mr. Rushdie from Malaysia. Sharman.
Oh, yes. Rushdie, hello, good afternoon. Malaysia's story, if I'm not mistaken, spans more than 3 decades of futures thinking and applied foresight practice. In fact, I learned my futures thinking course, I got my futures thinking course at the University of Science Malaysia, and the World Future Studies Federation ran a 2-week course on strategic foresight. I would like to hear if you could share a bit of that on Malaysia's foresight or journey of futures foresight experience. And second is that, what is the difference between a futures thinking and strategic foresight?
Well, thank you. First and foremost, I would like to congratulate the organizers and Phil Futures for having created this Philippine Future Society. Certainly, we in Malaysia do not have such entity, so I'm very glad to be part of this endeavor where you're really bringing this into the mainstream of futures thinking. Now, the thing about Malaysia, although I would say that we've done it, I mean, the organization that I'm in is actually have done foresight for the last more than 25 years, due to the fact that at that time we were calling it prospecting, but now how we behave here is actually what we are saying is actually in terms of foresight is actually the ability to generate futures advice. Now, in our setup is actually there needs to be 2 things. One is the ability to generate this advice, but there's also a need to actually establish a capacity to receive this advice. At present in Malaysia, ability to generate advice is there, but the capacity to receive advice is through informal means or through a so-called informal platform or platform that is actually not specifically talking about this future advice. And I'm glad that you have a senator in place. It reports to the parliament. So I'm very excited to see how this model will work in the Philippines. And perhaps I, rather than providing insights from Malaysia, learn from what's happening in the Philippines with regards to how you're setting up. Now, to your question with regards to Malaysia and how we do things, if I'm correct with the question. Now, I deal with the more application side of things, whereby I'm trying to take all these theories that's being developed by the likes of Sohail and applied it in terms of what we're trying to do in Malaysia. So one of the things that I would like to say in terms of if you're dealing in future thinking as I do, you need to be comfortable to be behind the scenes, because most of the things that is being developed, the story or narrations that's being created, the future narrations that's being created is not going to be there in the reports that's being published or in the strategy that's going to be out there. Because at the end of the day, the decision makers will want to know just what should we do. But you need to be comfortable to say, this is what we do because we have gone through the process of, looking at alternative futures, and we have evaluated the risk that needs to be taken looking at this alternative future. So the final end of the document could not would not be, perhaps stories would not be there, but knowing that you actually have done it and create these stories and all these strategies are actually being tested across these stories is very important. Now, in terms of what I think what strategic foresight is all about is because strategic foresight to me is a means to an end. That means there needs to be, okay, so you've created these stories, you've created all these narratives, so what? Now, when I am dealing with government, so they would know, they are not simply interested in, okay, so we know what the future is going to be about, so what do we do about it? So the idea is actually strategic foresight is actually taking this and trying to apply what we've learned from all this, and trying to create the best policies, the best action plan, the best programs that is possible to actually address these future possibilities that we've come about.
Yeah, thanks, Raji. And one more question. I've read a lot of cases on how Malaysia's departments have integrated and applied futures thinking, strategic foresight in industry development. And since you're into high technology area, yeah, can you give us an idea on how to actually build the foresight or organizational institutional capability? How do you start? Right? How do you do that?
Well, of course, the first step is in training. You need to actually put in the seed. Now, one of the things that we did last time was actually in Malaysia, we have a setup called the Public Service Training Institution. So what happened is actually we've developed a module that needs to be taken, develop a module and put it into the public service institution that they have to, at present it's still optional. But what we're thinking is actually if a civil service, civil service officials would want to be in a certain grade, they would need this particular course to be taken as part of their evaluation to actually advance their career. So the idea is now, since we were able to do that, the term foresight and futures thinking is not an alien term to any of the head of civil service anymore. So anytime when I want to say, let's explore what the future is going to be and things like that, everybody understand where I'm coming from. But again, even that, there is still, I think, lack of patience in term of trying to get to an answer, because we live, I think Sohail put it nicely, that we need to slow down, meditate, and in the government, unfortunately, politicians, is only, most of them are only interested in the election cycle, one election cycle. So there's always, what's the low-hanging fruit, quick wins. These are two terms that really cringe me, low-hanging fruits and quick wins. So the idea is actually you need, that it's a tough time finding this balance, but those are part of the steps that we did. So as I said, we've developed a module in the Public Service Department Training Institution, and that module has been running for the last, I think, close to 5 years, and it's been a success so far. And as I said, certain ministries are already, they do not have an official so-called futures unit or foresight unit, but already there's people in various ministries that's already open to this concept and already applying some of this in their thinking and their work.
Thanks, Rashdi. Dean?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rashdi, and it's nice to hear you again after our conference in Tagaytay, and of course during our APO training on foresight. And of course, I witnessed the presentation of Rashdi on high technology, and that was really amazing. Thank you for that. So from Malaysia, now let's shift to Philippines, and our resource person, of course, is Dr. Alex. Now, Dr. Alex, in your decades of practice in local governance and being one of the respected members of the academic community in the country and in Asia as well, and also your appointment years ago as CHED Commissioner, how do you see futures thinking in the Philippines, especially in the education sector?
Hello, sir. Good afternoon.
Sir Alex, your audio is kindly, yeah. Sir Alex, kindly fix your audio.
Okay, thank you very much.
There you go, Sir Alex.
I know I just have a few minutes, but if you don't mind the future, I prepared a few slides. Is that okay with you? It will be very quick.
Yes, of course, Sir Alex. We can share your PowerPoint. I think Celine is ready to share screen.
But anyway, this whole idea of futures thinking, for me, I will not even pretend to be an expert here. Celine, do you have it? Fine. Next, let's go to the next slide. I will not even pretend to be an expert here. Celine, can we go next slide, please? Celine, there. There's a picture of Jim Dator. I studied at the University of Hawaii. It was in 1982, where at one point Sohail was my classmate with the course on futuristics. And it was I think it was great to meet Jim, and I know Jim is there. And I'm really so happy that Sohail was our keynote speaker. Then fast forward, I was part of a group organized by Mr. Gil Santos. We are all aware that there is indeed a futuristic society in the Philippines right now. As a matter of fact, I think it's based in AIM, Asian Institute of Management, and Mr. Gil Santos, who's a good friend, invited us to this. The next slide, Celine, please. That talks about our interest, and I know a number of my students at the College of Public Administration are listening, but we embedded it into our courses in comparative administration and policy analysis. Why? As mentioned earlier by some of our speakers already, when we talk about policy analysis quantifying, it is somehow looking into a variation of the future. And I think the interest in these studies, we included this at the National College of Public Administration by suggesting, among other things, a lot has already been written. And if you look at the next slides, I asked my students to read these books. The next slide. You have The Brave New World of Huxley, written in the 30s, George Orwell in the late 40s, Future Shock by Alvin Toffler. Next slide. Then you have The Limits to Growth, fantastic book. Mega Trends by John Naisbitt, The Top Trends That Will Shape the World by Canton, and of course Harari's 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. The point is that we are in public administration. The point is that we are concerned about the future, but what kind of future? But the point is that many have actually tried to already talk about this by talking about the trends, the top trends that will shape the world, the rise of China, people even talk about the pandemic, etc., etc., including, of course, climate change, including limits to growth. In other words, things cannot be the same as they are before. Hence, we have to create the future because, as Sohail mentioned, if we just submit ourselves to that future that is deterministic, we're in trouble. We can create, we can shape our future. And that's what all these books are all about. So it's within that context, next slide, Celine, please, that we talked about the importance of futures thinking according to Harari, as you know. In such a world, the last thing a teacher, in the last forum organized by Senator Pia, fantastic forum, we talk about the importance of teachers. And the last thing a teacher needs to give pupils is more information. We talk about the importance of critical thinking. We talk about the importance of creative, not the factory that Sohail mentioned. So it's within that, and that's what's also mentioned by Harari in 2028. So I think we are all on the same page here, but really what Sohail mentioned about learning to disrupt, learning to question, learning to not accept things as they are, because there are other things that are more important. I'm done with a few more slides. So zeroing in on education, we were involved with Secretary Leonor Briones herself, somebody so future-oriented, and Undersecretary Nepo. They're setting up, as a matter of fact, they're setting up a futures thinking unit in the Department of Education. But this is also supported, I understand, by Senator Cayetano. In other words, naglalanding na po. In Filipino, it is gaining traction in this particular unit at the Department of Education through the leadership of Secretary Briones and Undersecretary Nepo. And we begin by looking at evaluations. We look at how we have evaluated the educational sector, the EDCOM, the Educational Committee. Next slide. And next slide. Celine. The point there, friends, is that there have been so many evaluations already. If you look at the last part, the bottom part of the slide, it talks about, you see there the report of Presidential Commission on Education for Reform, UNDP, DBM. And we just finished, as a matter of fact, another study on the state of education or the right sizing. And interestingly, many of the problems, challenges that we are raised today are essentially the same problems that were raised before. So what it is, this framework was prepared by my dear colleague, his name is Del Flores, and we're working on this. But the point is that, okay, we take off from what has been there before, but as Sohail mentioned about the long-term vision. How do we get there? So I guess in one sense, it is really contextualizing, bring about structural reforms, but equally important, Dr. Lisan, we will talk about this a number of times, the importance to change the mindsets as our previous speaker talked about. You have the structural reforms, but equally important, creative reforms through changing of the mindsets. This is the framework that we have been using for the Department of Education. Actually, we just started, and I'm very pleased that it somehow dovetails with our participation and leadership of Senator Pia Cayetano. So long-term vision of education, and as we mentioned, the kind of teachers that we have, the kind of students that we have, students who question, more critical, more analytical, rather than the factory that was mentioned earlier. I think I'm done with the last two slides. So there's a clear change. So I mentioned already that Senator Pia had this future of work skills and look at education. And I'm very pleased that we have a colleague from Bangkok. Her name is Dr. Agnes Ethel Valenzuela, who also shared with us the future of education. And it's very, very interesting that many of the things that CMEU itself has mentioned dovetail with what we have been talking about. So I think the important is not the deterministic future, the metaphor of Sohail, but really something that we create. And I must mention, by the way, in one of the discussions with Sohail before, create your own metaphor. And in the Philippines, I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Yeah, I think so. He said, create your own metaphor. And for us in the Philippines, our metaphor is where no one is left behind. Lisan, you talk about the importance of intergenerational equity. We talk about the importance of future that will hurt no one. Bayanihan, bayanihan, we are one. And it's very nice that we're even celebrating today the birthday of our dear hero, Jose Rizal. And it's within that context that in education, none gets left behind. So it's really parallel, changing structures, but equally important, going towards our collective vision. And this is done by yourself. You're the dean right now of the DAP, the Philippine Society of Public Administration. The last 2 slides. And then, of course, next slide, Celine, please. Today you're already launching the Philippine Future Society. So my point as a final note is that, you know, in one sense, when you look at this, it is not new, but it is new. Not new in the sense that in public administration, this has been involved in, this really incorporated in our policy studies, policy analysis, quantifying, etc., etc. But what this, I think, brings about is really bring about the changing of the mindset, learning to be more creative, learning to question and creating what we have, using the tools that we have, using the tools that we have in education and also in public administration. So thank you, Dr. Lisan, for this opportunity, and really congratulations on this initiative. And I do wish you well. And please let us know we are behind you. And I guess our gratitude, of course, to Senator Cayetano and to our colleagues from other parts of the world. Maraming pong salamat.
Maraming salamat, Dr. Alex, and thank you for emphasizing the changing of mindsets and behaviors, and that's very important in this era, particularly that we are facing this pandemic right now. And we have 2 more global experts to share their experiences on futures thinking and foresight. And I would like to ask or request Sir Sharman to please facilitate the questions for our 2 global experts.
Thank you, Dean. I would like to ask this question for Maya. Hi, Maya. It's good to see you again. Now, me as speaking as a professional futurist, you know, and had the opportunity to work with UN agencies, the Asia Development Bank, and the East West Center, and in different areas of public policy and strategy development. My question really is all about design. Designing training modules, facilitation, and tools and methodologies and frameworks. Of course, I've seen for almost a decade of practice how futures thinking and framework has evolved over time. You know, engaging, applying different types of methodologies and approaches. Now, one of the most interesting development in futures thinking communities of practice is, as I watch you in your presentation at the Futures Festival. You said that it is the integration and application of futures thinking to media, arts, and design. You said, if correct me if I'm wrong, that in one of your talks, that media, arts, and design can activate multiple perspectives of how people envision, imagine, create local and global futures. Of course, you know, good metaphors, provocative metaphors, doesn't come straight up. You know, it's not just like, okay, I think about this and here you go, you got a good metaphor. But then the process really is rigid and rigorous, creative, innovative. We would love to hear more about your thoughts, ideas on this, about this media, arts, and design in futures and foresight work.
Okay, thank you very much. And also thank you for the invitation, for being here today. I think this is a wonderful initiative and I'm really honored to be a small part of it. Well, media, arts, and design, there are a few things that we have to keep in mind when we're thinking about the future. We think about how we can be systematic and how we can rely on the available evidence. And when we start to build images of the future that become our objectives, or that orient us in the present, is better to say than to call them objectives, that point our nose in a certain direction. Then we do use a systematic investigation of the present and the systematic construction of images of the future. And we also need imagination. Now, it's really hard to find these two together in just a single person. And, you know, a futurist may be very good and practiced at using their imagination, but it's a whole different ballgame when you go to the strategic planners, because they need to be really hands-on, and it's a big ask to combine a systematic approach with deep imagination. We talk about rigorous imagination sometimes. And now, you know, media, arts, and design professionals are really practiced at using their imagination. On top of it, they really have a lot of experience with putting new things into the world, with making suggestions that are not always very easy to digest from the first instance. They are not shy about proposing a really creative idea, and they are also, it's their role. It's what, you know, they have learned to do and what they do in the whole of their practice. So when you begin to involve them in futures processes, not only do you make sure that you have more kinds of perspectives on what the world holds and what the potential is, because everybody, you know, sees the world from their own perspectives. And so the policymakers involved with mobility are, don't think the same way about this question as the artist who uses the local public transport every day. They have different experiences and so different outlooks. And so it's also really good to include them in futures processes, because they make these processes more diverse and more mixed. And on top of it, they bring a skill set that helps, that is acceptant of emergence, and that is generative. They are used to making things. They are, they have, they don't need to, they don't work with the abstract concepts, although they are part of their work. They also make them more concrete. And this is actually a huge challenge when people start to think about the future. A lot of the things that we say to each other, and especially if we have some of the jargon, I've noticed with partner organizations that I work with in Belgium, that a lot of the time the idea is like, ooh, that's still quite abstract. I'm having a hard time actually imagining these different alternatives for the future. And so when you involve media, arts, and design professionals, or techniques, because it's not just the professionals that can use media, arts, and design, it's also something that you can really reach out to, let's say, grassroots communities with. It's a good way to engage a broader public as well. When you involve these professionals, you get a better chance of producing tangible instances of these ideas about the future that are so important for guiding our policies and the way that we interact with the world today with an eye on the future. And so I think that for their generative stance, for their practice and experience with imagination, and for the way that their products or their creations, that's a much better word, for the way that their creations actually make possibilities for the future tangible to a broader audience, and they are, because of that tangibility, they also produce a bigger call to action, in my personal opinion. I think that that's one main reason. And also because they introduce a form of playfulness, which a lot of the time, because this is serious business, you know, we are looking at some very important questions in sometimes very challenging circumstances. But we know that a lot, like children learn better when they play. Actually, for a lot of grown-ups, for most of us, that's also true. And introducing that aspect of playfulness, I think, is really important. And that's also something that the media-rich approaches that media makers, artists, designers are good at can actually bring into the mix.
Thank you very much for that, Maya. Just to put it in a nutshell, what you're saying here is that while futures and foresight practice is indeed quite serious, you know, it has to undergo, participant has to undergo a rigid and rigorous process. But then again, you know, you have to strike a balance between being serious at the same time. The design has to be fun and playful, you know, that enables people to actually like generate insights at the end of the day.
I think playfulness is a real good motivator for people, and we actually come up with better ideas when we feel free through play, and the safe space that Anita was talking about. It's something that, you know, artists are also good at creating that, you know, a zone in which it's perfectly all right for grown-ups to come up with ridiculous ideas, which, you know, is what the second law of data actually asks of futures, that, you know, a statement about the future should at first seem ridiculous. Well, this is one of the ways to get there.
Thank you, Maya, for that. Very insightful. Certainly that will help us in the process. Now, for the last question, of course, last but not the least, I would like to ask this question to Mr. Luke Tay. He's the principal futurist at the Singapore Food Agency. I would like to, again, ask you about a question more on the aspect of, you know, initiating futurist thinking, you know, in an institutional governmental context. And of course, you know this, that futurist thinking appears to involve a lot of organizing, challenging assumptions, scenario conversations, program design, people and strategy development. Now, how do we make sure futurist thinking or foresight, once established, is a continuous activity? Like, can you give us any thoughts on that, and how might we make futures or foresight events and activities programs continuous?
Okay. So, Sherman, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to this event that I guess is a watershed in the Philippines movement into futures thinking and to build the community. I just want to clarify that I'm here in my personal capacity. So thank you for having me and inviting some brief remarks. I think to your question, broadly, it would be about structure and about culture. You know, so in government circles, not just talking about Singapore in particular, I think it would be, yes, how do you structure and provision a foresight function, you know, based on a conviction that you need to put a certain resource. I don't think, you know, it's so much money or resources, but even the headspace, the cognitive bandwidth, you know, to listen to futurists, be it from an in-house setup or from academia, or I think the best way, which is to engage with a wide range of stakeholders, both those at the coalface of a certain topic, but also those who are seemingly random, totally unrelated, but perhaps then all the more essential to take on board their unique perspective. So I think that's a structure, and I think the culture would really be one that may not start or end in the foresight role itself, but in being future oriented to plan and gear for the long term, beyond a term of government, maybe even beyond an individual's lifetime, out of a sense that there's something greater, be it on a national scale or even global, based on a certain cause that you're looking at. So I think those would be the two things: structure and culture. And of course, within that, there would be the different methods that one applies to be impactful in co-creating insights and communicating them in a compelling way. And there I would say that, I'm not first and foremost a futurist. I'm trained as a political scientist and historian, so I definitely believe in that part of the futures triangle of the weight of history having a significant bearing, not necessarily as baggage, but it can even be a ballast to move the whole of society forward on an even keel into a new future, rather than just having a detached elite or intellectual class. I'm rather conservative myself, so I think there's an importance in, recognizing that history and trying to see how you can transpose it and use it as a strength for any society in moving forward. And so, back to the method, I'm certainly no expert. I'm more of a practitioner futurist rather than an academic futurist. But I think, that's where such a community of practice as this is useful, to see how best to, really bring the impact of foresight across.
Yeah, and then this leads me to the next question. As you've said, you are a futurist practitioner, not an academic futurist. So I would just like to ask this question quickly. What sorts of skills do you need to develop to become a futurist practitioner?
Okay, I suppose a few would come to mind. I guess there are some core, commonly used methods of foresight. I think some other speakers have alluded to how even the definition of futures and, it kind of shades into some other disciplines as well. So among others, I think in Singapore, we are well versed with scenario planning. I guess that's a very large and lumpy, but ultimately very nuanced way to think about the future that ensures you think around corners in a way. Like, it's a good framework to make sure you're not just thinking about one factor, So I think, yeah, so being grounded in a certain method. I wouldn't say the more esoteric, the better, but as an intellectual, I definitely dig learning more about, different foresight methods. So for example, I see a lot of value in some of the methods that Prof. Sohail has developed in causal layered analysis, which, really gets at the metaphor and the narrative that you need to shift for impact. So I guess that comes to maybe just one more point, which is communication, which is another adjacent skill that is, I guess, a core skill for a futurist. How do you communicate to elicit insights that people may not even know have been there, or they don't want to give from their deepest anxieties and subliminal picture on things, in the foresight process, and then also in the foresight communication. How do you profile the decision makers, bring them on board in a dialogue process, so they're not your points, whether they agree with them or not, but they feel like it's something that's really shared and has resonance.
Thank you, Luke, for that. I would like to, Dean, could you facilitate this part? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Sherman, and to our global experts. Now, I'm sure you are very curious and you have so many questions to ask for our global experts. But I'd like to request Senator Pia first. I think she has questions for our experts. Senator Pia.
There we go.
Okay.
Hi. Well, not directed to anyone specifically, but I'm just always
Senator Pia, sorry, we can't hear you.
All right, there you go.
There you go.
Okay, so just as a background, I chair the very first Senate Committee on Sustainable Development Goals, Innovation, and Futures Thinking. This was formed when the 18th Congress started in July last year. And really the intention here was precisely to take our minds away from the now and to really be able to look into alternative futures. And I'm very new to futures thinking, as I had mentioned, but as far as the Millennium Development Goals, which then became the Sustainable Development Goals, it's something that I had been working on for a long time. And so when I learned about futures thinking, I said, you know, why don't we have this one committee? Because in any case, it's very similar because it's looking at what we want, how we want our future to look like, and how we can shape this future, how we can consider different futures, and so on and so forth. So, so far, I've had a number of hearings. What I've tried to do to put some sense into it is to follow the Sustainable Development Goals. So we have education, employment, health, and so on and so forth. And then I try to always have futures thinkers there with us to help guide the discussion and to also help us look beyond the immediate solutions that we always feel are there. I mean, the truth is, the way it works in, at least in the Philippine Congress, is if you chair a certain committee, then obviously you get that certain level of comfort where, you know, you get the information that you need, but sometimes there's not fresh information. And that's what I love about this committee that I now chair, is because I have the opportunity to get fresh information all the time. And it's not just the information, but it's how you process that information. I think that's more important than the information itself. It's how you process that information. So when I have futures thinkers there, you know, I'd like to believe that they help pave the way for the kind of discussions that I want to have. So the first thing I want to say is that I hope all of you will be a guest in my hearings in due time. I consider it an honor to be able to invite you, and I invite our colleagues, and after that, even for those who don't get to come, because there are only 24 senators, for the information of our foreign guests, 24 senators in the Philippines. So we all have our own committees to handle. But because this is the Committee on Sustainable Development Goals and Futures Thinking, I can pretty much cover everything. What I try not to do is to delve on the issues that are currently being faced by the committee chairs, because that is their jurisdiction. But mine is really like, in fact, in this time of COVID, I specifically try to go beyond just our responses to COVID and our responses to the new normal, but way beyond, which is really what futures thinking is about. So that's the discipline I'm trying to bring into this discussion. But yeah, I'd love to hear any comments, any experiences that are.
I think there's something wrong with the connection of Senator Pia, but we'll be happy to have her back. Senator Pia will get back to you. We have another question here from Dan. Dan, the question is, how do you see the future of agriculture in the Philippines with the threats posed by climate change and all its concomitant effects? What dramatic change should we adopt as a nation to attain a reliable degree of food security? I think Dr. Sohail can give some thoughts or inputs on this question, if Dr. Sohail is still there. Is Dr. Sohail still there? Okay, I think he left already. Anyway, maybe from our global experts, you can give some inputs and ideas on the question about agriculture. How do you see the future of agriculture in the Philippines?
or perhaps, Dean, we can like reframe that question, like what are the big questions on the future of food?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah,
It's
if you could
global.
take some big
Yes.
questions about the future of food, what would that question be?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right. So
yeah.
would like to hear from
yeah. We can start with Luke, perhaps.
yes, because he is in food security in Singapore. Yeah. Yes, Luke.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Prof. Lizanne. I think so. Again, I'm speaking in my personal capacity, and I won't pontificate about something I don't know about, which is the Philippine food system. So, but I think just in general, talking about the future of food, clearly it's a very exciting, challenging, relevant, and existential topic for all of us. So everyone is sick of COVID-19, including talking about it. But needless to say, it has had an impact on global food supply, global food demand, global food security. And I think just like other sectors, the question would be, how may this change things? What would the aftermath, I guess, everyone would have a concern, including, public policy people, industry, with, getting through the crisis, but a futurist concern would be, what is over the horizon, including, maybe next year, and in scenario terms, perhaps for longer than that, So I think that would be one foundation. How may this shock shape the future of food? Another one that someone wise shared with me recently is, obviously, if we are so obsessed with COVID, there could be yet something else, like I'm not sure about the Philippines, but like in the US, for example, in the food sector, they're anticipating, will there be a hurricane season, that may lead to yet another angle of disruption? And how do emergency services pivot from dealing with COVID to dealing with yet another challenge? Just a few more to put on the table in terms of things that are really driving the future of food. Clearly, technology, not just in a positive sense of how you can do more, better, more sustainably, and so on, but technology causing controversy, causing disruption, to existing livelihoods and ways of doing things. That would be another significant area. And maybe just one final one, as a fellow citizen of ASEAN, it kind of begs the question in food and in other areas, how may there be more collaboration at different levels? Just like as futurists, we have different circles and circles of circles. I think that may there be more upside potential for cooperation as an ASEAN food system, as one way to look more to one's own food security. But I'll just conclude with how the dominant theme seems to be right now, the question of how much more local capacity do we need to build up in terms of various strategic goods and commodities. Certainly food would be prominent there among those. So how can we think about that, but not just in very exclusivist terms, but in terms of building up capacity to help each other, as well as any fundamental duty of a country to help themselves and their own citizens. Yep.
I think Senator Pia is back. Sorry, Senator Pia. There was an internet failure a while ago. Would you like to proceed with what you're saying earlier?
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, I'm unmuted. Sorry about that. Anyway, as I was saying, so I have this platform. It's the Senate committee, which is a platform that allows me to dive deep into futures thinking. And the way I do it for some structure is to look at the sustainable development goals and go through each one. So poverty, education, health, etc., etc. And so my question, well, so that's the background, and this platform has allowed me to focus on the future, because there are other committees obviously in the Senate that focus in the now on the issues that need to be discussed now, with those different issues. And so because I got cut off, my question was general, but then I thought that I would use food security as an example, which actually brings me to Mr. Luke, but I don't know if you touched on it during the time that I was cut off, so feel free to, just let me know, or if there's somebody else who can share. My question is this: how do we change the mindset of decision makers, whether they are decision makers from the smallest entities of government, and in the Philippines, those are called the barangays. These are community-based decision makers, all the way up to the highest decision makers. That includes minister levels, members of parliament like myself. How do you change the way we think, so that we can put ourselves in that future thinking mode? I mean, I'd like to think that I'm more like that just because of my exposure, but even before I understood futures thinking was a concept, that tended to be my inclination. But how do you do that? Because as was mentioned earlier, decision makers are always in the now, always putting out fires. And so when I gave that presentation yesterday to my brother, who's a mayor, he said that, it was much welcome because they're always so used to putting out fires. And my recommendation was actually that every government office should have a futures thinking office, so that you have people dedicated to this, because you can't have literally somebody who's a law enforcer and there's crime going on outside, really being able to step back all the time. They do have jobs to do 12 hours a day. So my one solution was, you need futures thinking offices in these different areas of government. And it is actually a proposal I made to the Department of Education. I actually included it in their budget because I handle the budget of the Department of Education. And I said, we will put budget there so you can come up with that office. And now NEDA, they have an acting secretary there, Carl Chua, who's also very familiar with my work. And they also will be putting up a futures thinking unit within that office. So that's my little solution there as I continue to talk about this and raise awareness on it. But how do you jumpstart that, especially in developing economies? Like our country, it's very different look from Singapore, where there are less people going hungry than compared to the Philippines. So the tendency for decision makers is, wait, I have to solve this problem now. I'll give you another example. And that's why I asked about food security. Every Filipino knows here how we've yo-yoed on our policy on rice, on our self-sufficiency on rice. Okay, we've gone from one extreme to another on our policies on rice self-sufficiencies. And now the final decision, the latest decision of the president, was to allow the importation of rice. But that's just one example. That's just rice. How do you move forward? Because as we're discussing, we are not competitive in the prices of onions and garlic as well. But the question is this the food of the future? When Dr. Sohail was our speaker, he said agriculture as we know it is dead. It's not going to be the same unless people in Asia, who are the main producers of rice and the other commodities that we consume, really reinvent how we produce these things. So then that also steps into my agreement with Luke about regional cooperation. My brother, for your information, used to be the secretary, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of our country before he became Speaker of the House. So I also have that perspective. So I know that's a lot, but yeah, that's my question. The development, a country that is still in developing mode, how do you jumpstart and save time and resources for the future? You can have people thinking like us now, spending time on it, but how do you move that into the decision-making and the budget?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Senator P. I know there are a lot of angles to that statement and question. It's an issue of structure, capability, and the center-periphery concerns. I would like to, throw that question, if I may, to Cheryl. Can you give us any thoughts about that?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much, Senator, for that question. I mean, I do have a bias coming from Singapore, but we do work at the LKY school very extensively with countries around the region, and we have worked very extensively with the Philippines as well, including with the DAP and Department of Foreign Affairs, the Central Bank, and of course many university partners. I think from my observation in those conversations, especially with our other partners and participants of our executive programs, is that I think futures thinking, even though it's a futures focus, the action is still in the present, right? And that's also what makes futures thinking useful. So this present action bias, I think also becomes an important part of how futures work is done, right? And especially in a government context where it's not just about producing a futures report that nobody reads, but actually you do want it to affect, policy making and so on. Often in our classes, especially when we talk about futures, is that if you think of futures thinking and public policy as having two aspects, right? So there's one aspect, which is what I'm going to call the strategic intelligence aspect, right? So understanding what these trends are, what this future implications might be. But there's also another aspect, which is very important, which is the stakeholder management aspect, right? It's also educating these stakeholders about what the futures could be. So to take a very simple example, let's say we did a project on the future of food, and the department that did this project had a list of, let's say, 10 to 20 trends about what's the future of food. I think there's another part of it, which is also using that information to manage the stakeholders' view of what food looks like, what their own department priorities look like, whether or not new institutions or new teams need to be set up, new work has to be done, whether certain things are outdated. It's this kind of process of trying to include a level of uncertainty within a planning process. I would say futures thinking becomes quite useful when it tries to take into account the uncertainty within planning for the future, right? And to take from a resource allocation perspective, and strategic planning is very much around resource optimization and resource allocation. You also want to be, I'm going to say, placing bets in a way, but you also want to be focusing in or zoning in on things that are going to be resilient decisions for the future, as opposed to betting on a future that, in Sohail's words, he said, a used future that may not come to pass. And then what happens is that money is unfortunately then wasted in a way, right? So I think what we observe is that a lot of the conversation that we have with our partners then comes down to this, not just the idea of futures as setting the vision, but also as organizational discipline and habit, right? And in the public policy school, we would talk a lot about this for good governance, right? The idea that, as a discipline, we set aside some time, to make better decisions for the future, so that we can also address these structural challenges that all our countries face, depending on what kind of set of issues that we have. Yeah, I hope that's useful.
Yes, of course, Dr. Cheryl, thank you for that. I'm glad that Dr. Sohail is back, and I think he will give some inputs on the question earlier about agriculture, the future of agriculture, Dr. Sohail, and also how can we jumpstart futures thinking in the Philippines?
Thanks so much. Yeah, sorry, Zoom crashed for a while. I think really appreciate Senator Pia's interventions and comments. Hope we can get you to publish that. That'll be a gift to other legislators around the planet. And thanks Cheryl and Luke and other colleagues. For me, what I've learned in very harsh ways is you meet people where they're at. I gave a talk to 550 mayors in a place called Dabo. After 10 minutes, they started to boo me and proceeded to get drunk. And the ministerial staff who was there with me ran. They saw what was happening, ran from the podium, ran out the door and took their car. And I was left with 550 people, half that were getting drunk. And I was scared and nervous. I was unable to mindfully state my fear. I tried to talk over it. I tried to talk over them, and I messed up big time. Now, what I learned from that one in the time when I was in Croatia right after the war, we were doing positive futures. Students said, we don't want positive futures. We just got bombed. So my insight after many years of doing this, meet people where they're at. Place one where they're at is there's social injustice. Don't tell me about scenarios. I can't breathe. So there are first phases wherever they're at. So now if they say, I can't breathe, then we move up the scale. Let's imagine a future where you can breathe as a society, where police reform changes. So we have a meeting an hour from now with Interpol to start to talk about some of these things. How do we go from I can't breathe to we can breathe? So that's kind of phase one, moving from total powerless to a bit of agency. Once you've done that, then phase two is you have all this bread, right? So CEO said, well, give me risk mitigation. I don't want to lose my money. I don't want to lose my bread, my market share. They want different techniques. Once you've done risk mitigation, then say, aha, futures is about blue horizon, innovation, give me emerging issues. Show me how I can be different. Then they're excited. Then once they've done that, then they say, okay, well, what are the scenarios? Then we move to directionality. Where do you want to be in 2030? The 2030 question for a group that's just been through post-traumatic stress syndrome, that's had violence occur to them, that's a nonsense question. So the group that I talked to in Double, they were mayors. One mayor told me afterwards, the next morning he met me, he was still hungover. He said, I'm really sorry we were so rude to you. And he said, but you understand, his salary was, I think, $5,000 a year for a mayor. That's in Australia pretty low. So he said, we have budgets, but no people, because no one wants to live in rural areas. So we're in anger and pain. So what I've learned from that, wherever people are at, you meet them where they're at, and you find the right methodology to help, to assist them in their framework. Once I've done that, I can go to risk mitigation, then to some opportunity, then to scenarios, then to visions. Then I can go to this deep narrative stuff. Otherwise, someone who on the floor, I said, let's talk about your metaphor. He said, how about you buy me some bread first? Then we'll talk story. So that's kind of what I've learned. Meet where they're at and take them up the scale. Every step of the way, empowerment is happening. Because most of us feel there's a weight of history, weight of our colleagues, weight of someone or something on us. And we want to get rid of that weight. Futures becomes a way to be lighter, and that allows the possibility for innovation.
Thank you, Sohail, for that. I think Maya also has something to say. Maya, would you like to share your input here?
Unmute myself, here we are. Yeah, so this question about changing mindsets and also how to be with urgency, I think that we see it at every single level. Urgency is often considered a barrier to futures thinking. At the same time, it should actually be a motivator for it, because clearly, when you have clear images of the future that that you agree can provide orientation, navigating the present with all its challenges and the immediate needs, becomes a more doable task. I think it's a help to be able to deal with these urgencies and these immediate needs with a view, an eye on a longer term perspective. There are also a lot of issues that do not get solved in the short term that require time. And so there's this longer term that actually needs to be taken into account even for addressing these immediate needs. And then as far as mindsets is concerned, my experience with all kinds of people, not just policymakers, but also educators who've never heard of futures before, or people running programs for disadvantaged children, in every setting. when people first start to engage with futures thinking, there's this aha moment, and this aha moment can actually be a really important trigger for a change of mindset. It has to come from somewhere, and actually experiencing how different this kind of thinking actually is to what you do every day is a good start. And so I think that occasions need to be created for such aha moments to be had. And that would be a pretty good strategy to follow. And you can engage policymakers, but also their constituencies, because you know that if a policymaker needs to change their mindset, what their constituencies are saying and feeling and doing is very important as well. So we need to engage policymakers, I think, in futures activities and in futures literacy building programs, and that would be a very good start, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Maya. Yeah, we're quite a bit running out of time, and before I close this part of our program, I would like to ask this final question to Anita. Anita, are you still there? Anita?
Yeah.
Hi, Anita.
I think she left already.
Huh? She left already?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. So with that, allow me to close the fireside chat by, of course, asking everyone here one final question to all of our audience, not necessarily that you don't really need to answer it right now, perhaps just a question for us, everyone here to, reflect on after this event. Like the question is, what really needs to change for us to collectively accept the responsibility for future generations? It's today's Dr. Jose Rizal's birthday, and I believe, us Filipinos he had always that in mind, in all of his narrative and in context, he was always working for the future, and not just the future, but for future generations. So the question is, just for us to reflect on, again, I repeat, what needs to change for us to collectively accept responsibility for future generations? Again, thank you very much, Anita, Cheryl, Dr. Alex, Maya, Sohail, Rushdie, Senator Pia, and Luke, for this wonderful foresight conversation. We've learned a lot. It was really insightful, and I'm pretty very fired up. That hopefully we can continue this conversation. So all our futures are bright indeed, and let's look forward to the future. Dean, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Sherman, for facilitating that fireside chat with our global experts. At this point in time, we would like to share a short video clip as we celebrate Dr. Jose Rizal's birthday. And Sir Noel, De Gia, and Ms. Sheila would like to say something about Rizal and futures thinking. So, Sir Noel.
Yes, magandang araw sa inyong lahat. Good day to everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you
Okay.
clearly.
Good afternoon. Today, June 19, we commemorate the 159th birth anniversary of Dr. Jose Rizal, whom the writer Leon Maria Guerrero declares as the first Filipino. Our national hero has been recognized all over the world, not just in the Philippines, but as the greatest Malayan who ever lived, the pride of the Malay race. In Malaysia and in Indonesia, and of course here in the Philippines, there are thousands of Filipinos, Malaysians, and Indonesians who carry the name Rizal as a tribute to his greatness. We have monuments all over the country and all over the world that attest to his greatness. But one thing is for sure, Rizal is a futurist. To quote eminent Rizalian Dr. Pablo Trilliana III, Protean is the word that comes to mind when we speak of the Filipino national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal. Novelist, poet, teacher, linguist, ophthalmologist, sportsman, sculptor, and most of all, thinker. He was always all of the above. But there's one feature of Rizal, of his brilliance, that is seldom discussed. Rizal as a futurist. Rizal was always ahead of his time. According to Rizal, in order to read the destiny of a people, it is necessary to open the book of its past, because the past holds the contours of the future. In a series of articles for La Solidaridad, Rizal wrote a 4-part socio-political essay Filipinas dentro de 100 años, or Philippines a century hence, where he foretold the future prospects of the Filipino nation, which contained accurate predictions of the things happening in our era as we witnessed by most of us today. As future thinkers, we would like to promote a culture of foresight and advocate a future literacy for our people, especially the youth, because as Dr. Rizal once said, the youth is the hope of our future. Now we have a short clip for the slide, for the video. Can you share it, please, Celine?
Okay, so that's the end of the video clip. Sorry, well, at this point in time, I'd like to recognize Ms. Sheila Castillo for a short introduction about Phil Features, the logo, the members of this organization. Sheila? Sheila, kindly unmute your
Thank you,
microphone.
Dean. Let me share my screen, okay? I hope you're seeing this. Is everybody seeing this? Is everybody seeing my screen?
Yes, we can see the screen share.
Okay, so let me share with you something that will help us understand why we have the monument of Dr. Jose Rizal in our logo. I think one way of understanding Phil Futures is the way that we have conceptualized our brand as a professional organization. So first thing that we would like to share with you is that we want Phil Futures to be really distinctively Filipino as a professional organization. but we don't want to be parochial also. We want to be like Rizal. Rizal is local. So that's the idea. Another thing is that one thing that we don't see in the logo is Kilometer Zero. And Kilometer Zero is just in front of the monument of Dr. Jose Rizal. So this is a reference point for us. This keeps us grounded. They say that before you can even, leave the nest, you have to know your home, your reference point, so that then when you do an outward movement, when you expand as a professional organization, then you know where to return to. And later on, I will delve deeper into what is this reference point for us as a professional organization. Secondly, this obelisk, this is, I think, one of the most guarded, one of the most striking, one of the most easily identifiable monument in the Philippines. That's how we want futures thinking to look like in the Philippines. We want to be that familiar to the Filipinos. We want futures thinking to be familiar to the Filipinos. It's something that they know because it's something that they own. And this is what represents the very striking form or silhouette of this monument and the obelisk. For the obelisk, of course, as a futures organization, we want us to be represented or to represent an exploration of what is not there, of what we cannot see, the futures, no? But also, that's why we are referring to the upward movement of the obelisk. And it also points us to the true north. This is our ethical groundedness as a professional organization. We are working for the common good. This is our true north as a professional organization. And of course, being futures thinking as a commons, we want this to help transform how Filipinos are viewing, how we as Filipinos are viewing ourselves, and how we are going to view our future and how we want to transform our future. So that's all going or pointing to the north. So Rizal, as Big Noel mentioned a while ago, I think we could consider him as the very first futurist in the Philippines and in Asia, most probably. And what we would like to take from Rizal is the intellectual rigor of Rizal. As Anita Kelleher mentioned in the chat a while ago, she said that we should not be afraid of rabbit holes. And that was exactly how Rizal was as an intellectual. He was really, he really asked the right questions. He really, I think, beyond books, and that's what we want to take from us as our model thinking Filipino and first futurist. Of course, we admire and emulate the leadership of Rizal, and we understand the importance of leadership in futures thinking, as this will help, create a new, what do you call this, a new generation of leaders for the country. And but the kind of leadership that we want is not the leadership that is there in academic journals, no? Not the kind of leaders who are in the conferences and in their Zoom meetings, but the kind of leaders that goes to the ground and talks to the people in the tambayan, both virtual or physical, the barangays, no? So we want to really help Philippine leaders in various sectors, in education, in governance, in business, and in civil society, to be futures literate and futures ready, because they are going to translate that and communicate that to everyone. And of course, what we really want from Rizal is Rizal's vision. Rizal is not a manghuhula. He's not working on predictions. He anticipates things, and what he writes about is not necessarily the preferred future that is, but this is how he's seeing it as what might happen. And this foresight and vision is important. For us as future thinkers, for us as futures, this is very important. Our own personal vision as an organization and the vision that we want to create collectively, the future that we want, the preferred future that we desire. And that's what we are going to work on together. And of course, the sun for us symbolizes hope, illumination, and victory. And this is very iconic in Filipino independence movements. And I believe that this articulates futures thinking, I think, because futures thinking is a belief in hope. Future thinking is really optimism in practice. No, even if you look at the blind spots, even if you look at black swans, still the mere fact that you are thinking of the future, that means you have hope. But of course, we want to be illuminated, we want to be enlightened, we want the futures to tell us, to inform us, no, how we can transform today. And that is what we mean by illumination. And through this hope and illumination, we will have the victory. We will be able to achieve the preferred futures that we want. So that's how we are as an organization. Our narrative is still evolving, and because we are a new organization, but we will share with you, and this is an ongoing conversation. And of course, the most important thing is that we want you. We want you as leaders in your sectors. We want you as a teacher, you as a government worker, you as a doctor, all of us to be part of this in creating the conversation, so that we would know what is it that we want to happen. As Sherman's question before, what does it take? What will it take for us to have this responsibility, to take on this responsibility to transform the future that we want? That is the challenge. And Phil Futures, our team is ready for that task, but this is not something that we can do on our own. It has to be a collective effort. So in brief, we are a professional organization, and what we aim to make Filipinos futures literate and futures ready. I think that encapsulates what we are as an organization, and we will be open for membership soon. So keep in touch with us. This is our team, our conveners. You have met them all throughout this, and later on, Dr. Reggie will speak briefly about our next activity. This is our Global Advisory Board. You can see more of their profiles in our website later on. Some of them, like Sherry and Sohail and Anita, were here with us today. And of course, Maya, Lute, and Rushdi are all with us today, who shared with us their expertise. So we have this wonderful group of global futures experts who are going to share with us what they know, no? And then we will engage them in conversation, and we will contribute as an organization also, and as Filipinos, in the futures conversations. Of course, our senior fellows includes Attorney Pia Cayetano, our senator who set up this Committee on SDGs and Futures Thinking and Innovation, Dr. Brillantes, of course, who was with us a while ago, and Dr. Oliva, she will be here later for the summary of this activity. That's what we are. Please connect with us. Our website is open, but it's not yet fully finished. It's a work in progress, but you'll see a lot of information there already. Connect with us, email us at info@philfutures.net. We are on LinkedIn, we are on YouTube, we are on Facebook, and we are on Twitter. We would love to hear from you. And also, don't forget to join us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Sheila, for introducing Phil Futures to the public officially. And as a follow-through conversation, next week we'll have our futures conversation, and Dr. Reggie Ugadan will give us some details on this. Dr. Reggie?
Yes, thank you very much, fellow futurist Dean Rizal. For next week, um, Dean, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Dr. Reg.
Yes. We are not stopping here. We will be starting our conversation. I mean, the futures conversation next week. That's why we're inviting everyone to join us. The futures conversation is with the theme transforming mindsets, futures thinking and beyond COVID-19. So we have four sets of speakers for next week, including Dr. Lizan E. Peranticalina, through policy foresight and emerging initiatives for the Philippine government. Sir Sherman Ocruz also will be talking about Mind the Future. Myself will be talking about beyond COVID-19, the emerging perspectives for public organizations thinking in education. So this session will be moderated by our very own Dr. Alex Brillantes, and the synthesis will be given by Dr. Join us by next week. The information about the registration will soon be uploaded to our social media account, so please stand by. So thank you very much, Dean.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Reggie. We're almost done. Just very briefly, Dr. Alex will give us a closing statement. Sir Alex, if you're still there, can you give us a closing statement, sir? Okay, Sir Alex. All right, there you go, Sir Alex. Kindly unmute your microphone,
No,
Sir Alex.
I think the unmuting
Yes,
is really occurred. This will not take more than 3 minutes. But first and foremost, my own take from this, listening to you guys, young people, and really, I think Kay said, we can quote Einstein, I think. Imagination is more important than knowledge. I think that's very, very important. So I'll talk about the importance of creating our own metaphor. Your metaphor here is Jose Rizal. At one point, the work of Jose Rizal. Our metaphor here could also we talk about bayanihan. Then we talk about the importance of developing a culture of foresight. But in public administration, to a certain extent, there's an element of demythologizing this. It's not as complex as we think it is, in the sense that, it's built on what we have. And that is exactly what Sohail said. Meet people where they are. Some of us, for instance, in my case, we're in public administration, we can link this to policy analysis. We can link this to specific areas that in one sense were variations of looking at the future. So I think it's very important that the metaphor that you talk about should be grounded in terms of, as you just said, Rizal, the intergeneration for the next generation. Question, how now do you bring this down to the real world? As we say in Filipino, paano natin ilalanding? We talk about the importance of capacity building. Agencies such as yours, DAP, those around us, the De La Salle, UPNCPAG, etc. And we talk about some training institutions. I know, Shernon, you mentioned you're from the East to Center. And it's nice to meet you because I was there for a long time myself. That's where I first met Sohail. But anyway, academics coming together, but as you pointed out, not always living at the level of theory, but coming down to the real world, which so I mentioned, meeting people where they are. We have to be rooted, yet at the same time, not forgetting our metaphor, not forgetting the vision. It's in that sense that I would like to end by talking about how it was realized, how you make it reality. In the case of Senator Pia, she talks about, hey, why don't we have a futures unit in all departments? I think that's fantastic. Department of Education has done this. And all of us should really develop the culture that, as Mike said, the culture of foresight. I think, Sherman, you mentioned that. So I think it's just the beginning. We continue this communication, a very, very important key, a very, very important skill, rather, as far as this is concerned. Also, finally, somebody talk about the importance to involve the young. I guess you guys are middle-aged. We are at the older ages, but let's involve our children. It's within that context that we go to education. Hence, it's great that we're starting with education, as pointed out by Senator Pia, which is really part of the SDGs. We have to work with them. So retooling, thinking, critical thinking, not doing things the way we are. So it's really, at the end of the day, a change in mindset, demythologizing what this is. And you're so super because you even launched this in a very, very nice day, the birthday of no less than our national hero. So with that, I'd like to congratulate you guys. Mabuhay po kayo. And thank you for this opportunity. We will be here to support you, and great to meet our friends from the region. From ASEAN, nice to see my classmate for a long time ago, Sohail, and of course our friends from Singapore. And you, Sherman, East West Sender ka pala. As we say, aloha pare. Shaka. Okay, maraming salamat. Mahalo. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Maraming salamat, Dr. Alex. Thank you very much. And that ends our conversations on futures thinking. But before that, I'd like to request all of you to kindly go to your speakers gallery for a photo operation, photo ops. No? Let's mark this day as a very special day with a group photo. Okay, I think someone should give us a cue. I think Celine will count 1, 2, 3. Or I'll be the one to count 1, 2, 3. Celine?
Yes, po.
1,
1, 2, 3. Smile, everyone. Okay po.
All right. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next week. Thank you to our global experts, Luke, Maya, Cheryl, Anita, Dr. Sohail, and of course, Senator Pia Cayetano. We have support now from the Philippine government, from the Senate, and from the academe. And I am so happy to see all of you, my dear friends and colleagues from UP-NCPAG, from the House of Representatives, from the Senate of the Philippines, from DAP Graduate School of Public Management and Development, and from other state universities and colleges. And also we have friends and colleagues from other countries, Indonesia, and from different parts of the world. Maraming salamat. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, everyone. And happy birthday to Dr. Jose Rizal.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.
Salamat.
There you go. That's our tribute to Dr. Jose Rizal. Bye, everyone.